Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 11th and final round of the 45th Chess Olympiad being held in Budapest, Hungary. Now, yesterday, Team India clinched the gold medal in the men's section, but today there is still one final round, and the Indians are looking to finish in style. Now, going into this round, both Gukesh and Arjun Erigaisi are gaining a boatload of points with 9 points out of 10 individually. And if they can win their games today, they will both secure an Olympiad where India has not lost a team match. But on top of that, they will guarantee the individual gold medal on their boards, respectively, as well. All right, so India playing against Slovenia. The first game we're going to be taking a look at has Gukesh playing against Vladimir Fedoseev, who did win a very big match early in the tournament against none other than the five-time world champion Magnus Carlsen. Let's jump right into the action. So Fedoseev has the white pieces, and the game starts out with the move d4. We get knight f6, and now we have bishop f4. Now, the round was played a little bit earlier in this final round, about 3 to 4 hours before the regular starting time, so players had a little bit less time to sleep, also probably a little bit less time to prepare, and Fedoseev decides to play the London system. So we get d5, e3, now we have c5, knight f3, knight c6, and we get to move knight bd2. Now, one of the drawbacks I would say to playing the London system from Fedoseev's point of view is that he's playing Gukesh, who has prepared for the World Championship match, and I'm sure that Gukesh has good stuff prepared, seeing as this is a possibility in terms of one of the openings that Ding might play. So we get to move bishop g4. Fedoseev plays c3, we get to move e6. Now Black has played the basic development, but the bishop is outside the pawn chain. Black can also play e6 here, but with the bishop inside the pawn chain, it's not quite as good. So we have bishop g4, c3, and now we have the move e6, queen to a4 played by Fedoseev, and here we get the move knight d7. Now, the idea behind knight d7 is you block any threats on this diagonal. Now white can no longer create the pins. For example, say you play a move like e6, white can go bishop b5 here, pinning the knight, or the move knight to e5, attacking the bishop and the knight. Either way, black is in all kinds of trouble here due to the pin. So we get the move knight d7 here, stopping any knight e5 ideas, breaking up the pin, and now we have bishop b5 being played anyway. Here, Gukesh goes queen c8 to guard the knight, so if white ever trades, you can simply trade everything off, and material remains balanced. So we get rook c8. Gukesh plays move a6. We get takes, and now we're in an endgame where black has the two Bs here, but on top of that, you might notice that white has some issues here due to the dark square B, which is not super active. Black can go for f6 and e5 potentially, maybe a5, a4. At any rate, the computer already gives black some advantage. So we get the move c4. Gukesh plays f6 here, trying to play for e5 and building a big black center. We get the move knight b3, and now we have this move a5 being played. Now, this is an excellent move from Gukesh because what he understands in this position is that if white tries to trade everything off here and end up a pawn, you can go e5, building the big black center here, and after bishop g3, and now a move like rook to c8 here, the pawn on c5 is very vulnerable. Even rook b8, for example, is also supposed to be good. At any rate, white won't be able to hang on to this extra pawn. So after a5, we get h3 from Fedoseev, and now Gukesh plays the move bishop to f5. Gukesh could have traded the bishop for the knight on f3 as well. There's nothing wrong with it, but he wants to keep the two Bs on the board. And now black has ideas like a4 as well, and white is really struggling because if you aren't putting pressure on the c file here, for example, you aren't winning the pawn very specifically, then this knight's going to get kicked back, and black is still threatening to push e5 down the road, and white has serious problems in the endgame. So Fedoseev goes king e2. We get to move a4. Now we have to move knight bd2. This also is a mistake. White probably should have just taken on c5, and after takes e5, bishop g3, bishop e6 here. Black is clearly better with the two bishops in the big black center, but it is not necessarily that bad. Instead, we get knight bd2 from Fedoseev, and now we have to move h5. This is a nice move, stops white from playing g4. It takes more space on the king side. Additionally, down the road, you might even play something like g5 to take the most amount of space you possibly can. With white not being able to create anything in the center of the board, this is already very much one-way traffic. We know that Gukesh will not lose the game. The only question is, can he squeeze this endgame and get the all-important dub? So after h5, Fedoseev plays bishop g3. We get to move bishop e7, rook c3, and now we have king f7 and rook h to c1. Now, Fedoseev is trying to stack the towers on this file. He's hoping he can trade, take the pawn on c5, and create some kind of counterplay. We get rook h8 being played here from Gukesh. Now, if white were to trade, obviously after takes, you can quite simply play the move e5, and after c6, knight b6. White is still up a pawn, the pawn on c6, but with this big black center, the activity of the bishops, black is just much better. So we get d takes c5. Here we have e5 being played. We got takes, c6, knight b6, a transposition back into the game. And we have the move a3, or transposition back into the line I mentioned. Now, at this point, white is up a pawn on c6. But the big issue is this big black center combined with the two Bs here. You'll also notice the knight on d2. It's very, very passive. There's no squares available for the knight. White is just in a lot of trouble because of the lack of space. And even though you have the extra pawn, it isn't going to matter, as we see. Now, Gukesh plays move rook to a5, and this is just an excellent move here. He activates the rook, trying to play rook b5 and win the pawn on b2. Now, the reason this is such a great move is that you'll notice there's a c pawn. White can always push his pawn to c7, but even if the pawn gets to c7 here, it's not going anywhere. This pawn is blockaded by the rook. The bishop and the knight also help guard the rook on c8, and white has no threat. So his extra pawn isn't going anywhere. And on top of that, in this position, black wants to play rook b5. And now this light square b is really, really effective. Let's just say you go bishop h2 and we get rook b5. White cannot guard the pawn. Both the c2 square and the b1 square are covered by this light square b. So you can't put a rook there. And if you ever go b4, after takes, now you lose your extra pawn on a3. And all of a sudden, after rook c1, knight c4, now you lose the pawn on c6. And you've lost all your queenside pawns. And once you lose all the queenside pawns here, black simply has one extra pawn. And he also has the two bishops. And this is just GG, why not? So, after rook to a5, Fedoseev goes knight to e1. We get rook b5. And now we have the move knight d3 being played, trying to guard the pawn on b2. But now Gukesh correctly plays the move d4, exploding the center of the board. Now you're probably thinking, well, now this opens up the diagonals and you don't have the big black center. But white is in all kinds of trouble due to this weak knight being targeted by the bishop on f5. We got pawn takes, pawn takes. We have the move rook c2. And now Gukesh plays rook e8 with the idea of simply moving the bishop away and checking the king. If white were to play with like h4, bishop f8, you'll notice the king is in check. If you move the king, you lose the horse in the game. If you block, you lose this horse. And at this point, it's simply dire straits. So Fedoseev goes knight to f3 here, walking into all kinds of fossils. But if you were to play bishop f8, now you can simply go king to d2. And at least you're still guarding the knight on d3. So Gukesh plays the move rook to b3 here. Another excellent move, pressuring this knight on d3. And at this point, the game is effectively over because now if you move the knight, not only can I take the rook, I can also go d3, forking the king and the rook. I still have all my fossils by moving this bishop on e7, and it's just GG. So we get knight fe1 being played here by Fedoseev, trying to hang on. Now we have bishop b4 check. King is under pressure. We get king f1, and now the trade of the bishop for the knight. Fedoseev takes. We get bishop takes c2. Knight takes c2, and now we have the move d3. Now, white is only down one exchange here with the knight for the rook, but black is winning the pawn on b2. You're pushing d2. The c pawn is not really going anywhere. And now it's simply a question of how many more moves will it be until Vladimir Fedoseev resigns the game. So, Gukesh plays knight e3. We get rook takes b2, c7, and now we have the move knight to c8 being played. A nice move here. The knight stops the pawn. It blockades it, and now you're free to start moving with all the towers. Push the d pawn. We get h4. Gukesh goes rook a2. We get bishop f4. Rook takes a3. And now we have the move g3. Now, Fedoseev could have played knight c4, but after rook to a2 here, knight d6 doesn't do anything because even though it forks the king and the rook, it also forks the knight. And there's a classic meme where you fork like the king, the rook, and the knight. You realize, of course, a knight can capture the knight. And after takes, and simply rook c2 here, white is not queening the pawn, and black will win. So we get the move g3. Here, Gukesh plays rook b3. We get knight c4, and now we have the move rook e6 being played. Not necessary to play this move. a3 also good enough, but rook e6 is also completely fine. We get knight d2, rook b2, rook c3. Now, if white were to go knight c4, Gukesh would play rook c2, forcing a trade of the towers or winning the horse on c4. Fedoseev plays rook c3. We get to move rook a6 here. Nice move from Gukesh, putting the rook behind this passed pawn. And now black wants to push p with a3, a2, a1. Fedoseev plays rook a3. We get to move rook c2, knight to e4, and now we have the move king g6. A quiet move, simply moving the king out of any danger zone where there would be some forks on the board. We get king g2, knight e7, king f3, and now we get to move knight to d5, attacking the bishop and the pawn, forking them, obviously. And at this point, Fedoseev can pretty much resign because once you lose the c pawn, you have nothing left in the position. We have knight c3 being played, a nice little tricky move here, trying to hope for something like knight takes bishop, because then you would queen the pawn and win the game. But Gukesh simply sacks the knight here with knight takes pawn, bishop takes knight, and now we get to move d2. Black is pushing the wide peepos. When you combine that with the fact that the knight and the bishop are not coordinated here, something is going to fall. Fedoseev plays king e2. We get to move rook to e6, king to d1. If white were to move the king anywhere except d1, let's say f1, black could sack the rook. The rook takes knight, and after takes, you get a queen and win the game. So Fedoseev goes king d1, and now we get to move rook to b2. And in this position, Fedoseev resigns the game in view of the fact that there really is no way to stop black from queening a pawn or white losing material. Now, if you were to play a move like bishop f4, there's simply rook to e1, checkmating the king here. So you have to go knight e2 trying to stop it. But now black will go rook to b1 check. If you move the king, I queen. So you have to take the pawn. And now after rook b2 check, there's a kebab on the second rank. You take the knight, and at this point, it's all but over. Black is an extra rook for a bishop deep in the endgame. White will lose. Just a question of it's 5 moves, 10 moves, however many moves. But Gukesh will win this game against anybody in the entire world. So after rook b2, Gukesh gets this huge win with Fedoseev resigning the game. That means he finishes off the Olympiad with an insane score of 10 points out of 11. So to put it in perspective, Gukesh playing on the top board, playing against some of the best players in the entire world. He did not play Magnus, by the way, but played many top players in the world. He wins 9 games and draws 2 games against the best players on this planet. And at the end of the day, he gains a whopping, I think, 29 points, if I'm not mistaken. He moves up to number 5 in the world, I believe. But beyond that, he has a 3,056 performance, and he gets the gold medal on board 1. This performance is a performance for the ages. It might be the best performance in the entire history of the Olympiad on board 1. I'm not sure on that. Of course, people can go and check that themselves. But just an incredible run from Gukesh from start to finish, showing why he deserves to be in the World Championship match playing against Ding Liren. Now, to put a bow on the Gukesh storyline, I would say that looking at his games throughout this event, and in particular the win against Wei Yi, and I think it was round 8 or round 9, that endgame win bodes really, really well for his chance. That was a wow moment, I would say, in some sense. Just incredible performance from him. I do think that looking at the match, it's very hard to see any world where Ding wins against Gukesh. Ding made a quick draw today against Fabiano Caruana from the United States. So barring something insane happening, like Ding being the greatest actor of all time or magically finding his form, just bottling it up somewhere and drinking the magic elixir, I don't see a world where Gukesh is not going to steamroll Ding and become the next world champion. All right, so back to the Olympiad. Gukesh gets a big win, and now the next game we're going to be taking a look at features the other player who's just been steamrolling players left and right, the unstoppable train that is Arjun Erigaisi. Also going into this round on 9 points out of 10, the same as Gukesh with a 2,900 plus performance. And he is also, I believe, number 3 or number 4 in the world currently as well. So if Arjun wins this game, he'll go 10 out of 11, guaranteed the board 3 gold medal as well. So let's take a look at his game. So Arjun playing against Jan Subelj, also from Slovenia, rated a little bit lower at 24.98. And now the game starts with e4. Arjun plays d5, and my sense is that Arjun, when he plays the Scandinavian opening here, he's trying to play something a little bit off the beaten path, get his opponent out of theory, and just outplay him later on. We got takes, knight c3, and now Arjun plays queen d6. Now in this position, there are 3 moves. There's queen a5, queen d6, and queen d8. All 3 are relatively playable. White should have a small advantage, but that being said, there is a lot less theory, and it's more about who plays the best moves. Arjun goes queen d6. We get to move d4 here, knight f6, knight to f3, and now Arjun plays g6, trying to fianchetto the bishop to g7. Subelj plays the move knight b5. This, by the way, is the best line from white. It's pretty impressive to see this being played. We get queen b6, and now we have the move a4. Now, the reason that Subelj plays a4 is not only do you guard the knight, but if black were to play bishop g7 after a5, if you go queen c6 to guard the pawn, and knight e5, queen e4, and bishop e2, suddenly this pawn on c7 is super weak, so you have to guard with knight a6 after castles, and rook e1, followed by bishop f3. White is actually doing really, really well with these knights in the center of the board and the activity on the half-open e-file. So Arjun plays a6, logical move. But now we get the move knight a3, and it's clear why white has played a4. What white wants to do is after bishop g7 and knight c4, now the knight is headed back towards the center while attacking the queen. And more importantly, if you reach an endgame like this, black really can't go b5 here because white would take, and there's pressure on the a file. So a4 is very nice because not only did it long-term stop b5, but it helps white reroute the knight back towards the center of the board. So Arjun plays bishop e6. We get knight c4, takes, and now we have the move bishop g7 being played. Worth pointing out that if black were to play queen b4, trying to check the king and win the bishop, white simply goes knight d2, followed by c3, building the big white center. So we got bishop g7, castles, c3 is played, and at this point, Arjun plays c5. Now, this is not a great position for black, all things being considered. White has the 2 Bs here. Very little issues, very little in the way of complications at the center of the board. White has a nice pawn chain as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see how Arjun tries to complicate the situation and get a big dub. We get A5, queen C7, and now Subelj takes on C5. We get takes, queen D4, rook C8, and here we get the big mistake, which is this move knight E5. Now in this position, Subelj, and by the way, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name for anybody who is Slovenian. If I am mispronouncing it, I do apologize. At this point, Subelj, what he should play is he should retreat this bishop away to say E2, for example. And after knight D7, rook D1, let's just say E6, and queen A4, White keeps the 2 Bs alive in this position. Say queen E7 and bishop G5. White has the 2 Bs in this position. Very little in the way of structural issue. White has 2 chains of 3 pawns on both sides of the board. I wouldn't say White is much better, but White should not be worse here. But the big issue is that when you're playing someone who's 2,700 plus and you're much lower rated, trying to find good move after good move after good move after good move for the whole game is very difficult. And for Arjun, most of his moves here are going to be very easy. He isn't going to have to spend a lot of time. He's going to be able to play quickly, which will also put pressure on the clock. And this is probably the single biggest reason we get a mistake with this move, knight E5. Now, Subelj is probably thinking, well, I attacked the pawn on F7, right? This is good. But after Arjun plays E6, stopping the threats on diagonal, White has issues here because now you can't simply move the bishop away because after bishop E2 takes, you get an isolated pawn, which we're about to see in the game, by the way. And if you were to move the knight, it's spaghetti time. You lose the bishop and the game as well. So you can't really move the bishop away. You can't move the knight away. And that means that you can no longer keep your structure intact where you have the 2 sets of 3 pawns side by side on each row. So we get the move rook A4. If White were to take, by the way, after takes, now your knight and bishop are under attack. Maybe rook D1 is still okay. But after knight C6, takes, and rook C4, White has lost the bishop pair and black will have no issues whatsoever. So we get rook A4. Arjun trades on D4, and now he plays knight C6. And already here, it is now game on. Arjun has created the weakness, this isolated pawn on D4 in the endgame. And even though White has the 2 Bs, this pawn is going to become a serious liability, as we're about to see. So we get the trade. Bishop G5. We get to move rook to D8, pressuring the pawn on D4. We get rook D1. And now Arjun plays the move rook D7. Now, Arjun would love to play rook D6 right away, which is fine. But after bishop to E2 with the idea of bishop to F3, black is still better, but there's no need to rush it because when you go rook D7, if White were to play bishop E2 to try and play bishop F3, now there is, I believe, rook to C2, creating the kebab on the second rank, and black is better. So Subelj plays king F1. Arjun goes knight to D5 here. Also, another reason behind rook D7 is that now there's no pin, so you can move the knight to blockade the pawn. We get to move king E2. Arjun plays H6. Bishop E3, and now we get to move knight E7. What Arjun is trying to do is put the rook on D6, stack the towers, and go knight F5 to win the pawn on D4. Subelj plays bishop D3. We get rook D6, rook D2, and now we have the move F5 being played. Now, this is a move that maybe is not the best computer move, but I really do like it because what it does is it takes away this diagonal. Even if you go knight C6 and White gets bishop E4, black is a little bit better, but there's always some pressure here on the diagonal due to the classic wooden shield on E4. Whereas when you go F5, White can no longer get the bishop on this diagonal any longer, and black can always put the knight on C6 or D5. Either way in this position, black is much better. Also, Subelj runs out of obvious moves and simple plans now. So we get the move bishop C4. G5 played by Arjun, F4. Now we get to move G4, fixing the structure in the center of the board. Black still has knight D5 or knight C6, and Arjun is simply waiting for the moment to pick a square. We get rook B4. Arjun plays knight D5. Now we get bishop takes knight, rook takes, and at this point, Arjun has achieved everything he could ask for. Now, you could say that G5 and F5 were simply moves to take space and expand, or they were very deep positional moves. Either way, the position we're in now is very close to being technically lost, because when you look at the pawn structure on the center of the board and on the edge, all of these pawns that White has are on the same color as the darks for a bishop of black, and White's bishop is simply guarding the pawns. It's a bum bishop. It is doing nothing whatsoever. So even if there wasn't a clear intended plan behind F5 and G5, what Arjun has transitioned into here is simply an endgame where he's a great bishop and White has all these pawns on the color of the bishop, and they're very, very good chances to win the game. So we got to move rook B6. Arjun plays king F7. We get rook to D3 here, trying to go rook B3 and go after this pawn on B7. Arjun plays rook E7. We get rook B3, and now we have the move bishop takes D4 being played. Here, Subelj trades the bishops, and now he goes rook takes B7, And this is really the last moment where maybe if white were to play rook 6 b4, it's probably still a draw. This is a tough move to play, by the way, because you simply have given up a pawn on d4, you've hung the pawn, and you feel like you've done something wrong. So to play a move like rook b4 is pretty difficult. But after rook d7 and rook d3, if white simply tries to trade off all the, actually not there, sorry, king f2. If white tries to put the king on g3 and keep the rooks towards these pawns on b7 and e6, computer says this should be a draw with perfect play. Now, do I think this will be realistic? No, not at all. And definitely not for someone at 2500 level, because as I just mentioned, in this position, you feel like you've just lost a pawn. You feel like you've blundered the d4 pawn. You've got to be active. It's desperation time. You can't afford to be playing quiet moves like rook b4 here. So Subelj takes on b7. Arjun plays rook e4, a nice little touch, forcing the white king to go one way or the other. If you were to take on f4 here, after takes, and rook b6, you'll notice that black cannot infiltrate on the f file here, as the Bond Cloud King on e2 simply stops any such ideas. So when Arjun plays rook to e4, now the king has to make a decision. It's like a penalty kick in football, where the king or the goalie has to go one way. So Subelj goes king d3, but now after rook takes f4, the rook is infiltrating on the f file because you've tickled the king. The king's had to run one way, and now the rook will go after all these pawns on the king side. Subelj trades, and now he plays rook to b7. We get king f6, b4, rook f2, and rook b6. Now what Subelj is doing here is desperado time, trying to push his p on the queen side, use these two pawns, desperation, hoping that he can get a queen before black's pawns get through. Now, optically speaking, it looks like the white king is very close to these pawns, specifically the g and the f pawns, whereas the black king is very far away. But as we're going to see, black has 4 pawns here, not 2, and it's just too much. Arjun takes, we get takes, we get rook a8, and now we have rook a2. And as the old saying goes, a king cannot stop a pawn avalanche here. These pawns are just a little bit too quick. More specifically, this g pawn is getting down the board, and the king is also cut off here. If white could magically, say, be able to get a position like this, get some position like, I guess I'll waste a move so that it's not quite the same. But say you get some position like this. If the king is on e2 where it's not completely cut, I guess this is also losing because of f4. But if the king can get back here to f1 and stop the g pawn, there are always chances to draw the game. But when we have this position with the rook on a2, the king cannot cross the line here. This rook covers all the squares on the second rank. And so the king can't get back, then this g pawn is just too fast. So we got the move b5, Arjun plays g3, we got the move a6, and now we have this move h5, which is simply the best move here, because if white goes b6, trying to push the pawns, now you go g2, trying to queen, and after rook g8 to stop the pawn, you take the pawn on a6, b7, rook b6, white queens, you sack the rook, and after takes, you get a queen. And if white, of course, takes the g2 pawn at any point, you simply have 3 extra pawns on the board, and the win is elementary. So after h5, Subelj plays the move king to e3, trying to get his king over. Arjun plays h4. We now get the move rook g8, trying to stop the pawns, but Arjun pushes p anyway with h3. Subelj takes, we get h2 here, and now the only way to stop the h pawn is to play rook h3, but unfortunately there's the move rook to a3, checking the king and winning the rook. Now at this point, Subelj could have resigned the game, but it's very sporting of him to play the move king f4 on the board, allowing Arjun to get the checkmate with e5 rather than resigning. I think if Arjun had a good score, this probably doesn't happen. The fact that Arjun is also having a legendary performance in this event probably led to Subelj being very gracious and allowing the checkmate to occur on the board. So we get checkmate on the board in the game between Subelj and Arjun. This means that Arjun also wins his final round. He also gets to 10 points out of 11 and has a performance rating of 2968. And he is going to win the gold medal, for the individual gold medal, on board number 3. So for India, they are going to win the match. There's still 2 games going, but they're in no danger in either of those games. They will get at least a draw to finish on a team score of 21 points out of 22, meaning they will have won 10 of their 11 matches. The only match they did not win will have been a draw against Uzbekistan. So for India, it's pure and total domination from start to finish. Now I do want to touch on a couple of other general things. So yesterday, there was an interview with Wesley So from the United States of America, who said that if I were playing the Olympiad, the U.S. would, quote unquote, easily win the gold medal. Now, I'm simply going to be honest. I think that even if I had played in the Olympiad and I was on form playing well, there's no reason to believe that India still would not have won the gold medal. With Arjun and Gukesh having performances for the ages, 10 points out of 11 on boards 1 and 3. You're talking about those guys scoring 2 points for their team in pretty much every single match of this Olympiad. That means they would have to lose 2 games elsewhere to not win every match. And frankly, I think that it's a little bit unfortunate to hear such things, because on some level it feels like it kind of is an excuse, or it diminishes what India has accomplished. But in my mind, there's no shot that even if I played, that India would not have won this gold medal. They deserve to win it. Arjun and Gukesh led the way with historic performances. I would also add that I want to give a big shout out to Vishy Anand from India, the former five-time world champion. He is somebody who does not, I think, get enough credit in this modern day and age, since he wasn't super popular, I guess you could say, at the peak of pandemic and everything else. He's kind of a little bit past his prime. I mean, India obviously very well known, but I do want to give him a big shout out, because when we go back in time, when Vishy Anand was playing chess as a teenager back in the, I think it's like 1970s into the 80s and 90s, this is somebody who came from India, and this is a place where there's very little chess culture. There were no grandmasters at the time. I think there were maybe one or two IMs. I think Manuel Aaron was one of the Indian IMs who I'm aware of. But there were very few strong players. And this is at a time before computers, when you had to read books, you had to be around other very strong players to improve. And Vishy came from a country where there were no strong players at all, and you had the Soviet machine. So when I look at what is happening in modern day chess with the explosion of the Indian juniors, I think you can directly credit this to Anand and what he did, becoming world champion, raising the profile of chess in India, and becoming such a household name there. And I would say that when we look back, or we look at chess history, modern chess history, the only person in terms of contribution to chess who could even compare to Anand is probably Mikhail Botvinnik, the founder of the Soviet chess school in current day Russia. That's maybe the only other person who I think you can say had as much of an impact in chess as Anand has had. Regardless, it's amazing to see. The future is very bright for Indian chess. I think we're going to see more sponsors, more interest in the game there. But it's just great performance, and really nothing I can say but the fact that India is the new Soviet Union, the new superpower in chess. And it's going to be exciting to see how they do in the upcoming Olympiads, and also, of course, whether they take back the world championship throne when Gukesh plays against Ding Liren in November. So, on that note, I hope you guys enjoyed this recap from the 11th and final round of the Olympiad. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below. And we will be back with some more great recaps. I do want to point out one last thing, because I forgot. I will probably do a recap on a couple of the other juniors, like Ediz Gurel from Turkey, who's having a very good result as well. But that will be in the coming days. So, at any rate, hope you guys enjoyed the recap and have a great rest of your day. See you guys soon. Keep it real. Bye.